Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. In this episode, you'll hear a panel discussion that took place during a recent online event that I co-hosted called Make 2026 Your Safest Year Yet. The event brought together a number of leading thinkers in the safety profession to explore how organisations can move beyond activity and compliance and start focusing on the things that genuinely improve safety performance. So in this panel conversation, I'm joined by three fantastic guests, Louise Hosking, Carla and Davy Snowdon, who unfortunately had to leave the session a little early, just to forewarn you. Together we'll explore some important questions, including why organisations can often be very busy with safety activity, but still struggle to see meaningful improvement, how better use of data and evidence can transform decision-making, and what practical steps safety leaders can take to make real progress in the year ahead. If you'd like to watch the full webinar recording, including all of the presentations from the day, you'll find a link in the podcast show notes. I hope you enjoy this panel. So now let's get into it. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
So, thank you guys for your contributions today. It's been really excellent, I think, and the feedback in the chats has been very positive as well. So, I wanted to wrap up with just a bit of a panel discussion, and then give the opportunity for anybody else in the audience to ask any further questions or give any comments or whatever. So, if you're live with us in the audience and you want to say something, just go to reactions, raise your hand, and we'll bring you up. We'll bring you up at the end. So we've covered a lot today. I'm keen to sort of make this as practical as we can. So I just wondered, maybe in terms of thinking about diagnostics. So I covered some of that in my session. Lots of organisations, as Louise said, are busy with safety activity, but maybe we're not seeing as much improvement as that activity would perhaps merit. What would be some of the more common things that you see that kind of looks like progress, but actually isn't? So if anybody wants to take that one on first.
Everybody's being terribly polite. I wonder, one of the things that's come up recently is around management of hazardous substances. And what's quite interesting, you talked about it, and Louise talked about it too, about data. And I think in this country, we tend to be very good at trying to cross all the T's and dot all the I's in terms of compliance. But people will do things like risk assessment, and they'll have like systems. So they'll go, oh, we've got a posh new system in place, which looks on the outside like progress. But then they'll do risk assessments for things, and then they won't follow up or look at the controls. But they also won't find their starting point. So Louise talked about it earlier, data. Christian, you talked about evidence. What's the point in doing any of those things if you haven't got any evidence? So when it comes to things like occupational hygiene in the UK, I think we're not particularly very good at that. We're not very good at, managing things like wells. So I was thinking about chemical exposure. People will say, well, we don't actually expose people to those chemicals. And we would say the same thing with slips. What you were saying, Christian, and Louise, what you were saying is a bit like, where's the data to back up that claim? So it looks like progress. Oh, we've got a fancy new COSH system. Lovely. We've got 452 COSH risk assessments. Okay, have you read any of them? Have you done anything with them? Is there any data to show that you comply with the legislative requirements? So that was one of the things, like the basic things I was thinking about that I see recently.
Yeah, no, that's good. Davey, there must be some stuff that people do a lot of in your sort of manual handling world that actually isn't really helping, but sort of people perceive that it is.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of myths and fallacies associated with manual handling, and they seem to think, I think you touched on it yourself a little bit, was, well, I've done the training, that's okay, isn't it? And it's so insufficient now. Number one, we need to know, is the training correct? Because the myths and fallacies that are out there. And then, is it effective? And this is where we were very fortunate to be able to get that behavior change because it could physically feel a difference. And that was such a key changer in driving down accidents. And they're unprecedented when you get it right. But I would say, one, the training, is it correct? And training just isn't enough. You need that sustainability program to back it up.
Yeah, definitely agree there. Louise, anything from a sort of
Yeah.
leadership and sort of governance perspective where you sort of see that, we're trying, but it's not really doing what we think it is?
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of started my presentation saying we are doing a lot of stuff, you know? We're doing a lot of audits. We're doing all these, we might be going out and doing investigations into why things are happening. Um, and as you can imagine, I'm going to tackle this from a strategic perspective, is something that I often say is, you know, we need to be strategic about where we're putting our resource because it's finite. And what are the 5 things that we can do that deal with the 55 below? So my challenge is always to my teams, tell me the top 3 things that we need to do. And we need to be much more strategic in our approaches, because if our teams are, on the ground being busy, doing incident investigations and helping and supporting people on the ground, which is really, really, really important. But actually, we've got systemic issues across the organization and we're not tackling it on a strategic level. We're going to be running on a treadmill, and
Yeah,
that's potentially going to be holding us back.
yeah. Agree with you there, I think, and that's part of what I was alluding to in my slide about sort of that return on effort curve, isn't it? It's kind of, yeah, we're doing some stuff, but can we just do it that bit better? And I think that's probably one challenge I'd give everyone here today is that's joining us is try and have some time and space. And Louise, you mentioned this,
I know it's
having
been absolutely
yeah,
phenomenal for me, because I've kind of gone away and I've said, right, okay, I've worked with a huge number of organizations on transformation. And certainly, if I think back to being IOS chair of council, some of the changes that we made there when I was chair of council in respect of how council operated to get that language change between council and the board, so that actually that level is working more effectively, where we're communicating with leaders in their language, because as Carla said, they don't get what we're talking about. So it's safety, and I'm seeing it in the governance training that I'm doing at the moment, is that safety is seen as compliance. It's not seen as a strategic risk within
mm,
organizations.
yeah,
So
definitely okay.
Louise is right, isn't she? When we talk about risk, it's all about I've got to tick a box that needs to be sorted. Oh, I've done that now. And I was saying about Kosh, that's a perfect example of where people think they're progressing, and they go, oh yeah, all of those are done, and we've got this fancy new system, and boom, boom, boom. Look, we've got 300 active risk assessments that don't need reviewing, but that's not what I would call progress. Are the risks being managed? That's the fundamental question. Is it safe? Like, I feel like it's a movie. We have to ask ourselves the questions. Is it safe? Do you remember the movie where it's like everything every 5 minutes was, is it safe? That's the
We should
question.
do. We should do. We should speak to Netflix and we should pitch a new version of Is It Cake? But it's Is It Safe?
Yeah, absolutely. But Louis, Christian, you said it, David said it, we're all saying the same things. We're all talking about different subjects, but we're all saying exactly the same thing. In terms of leadership, strategic leadership, there's such a disconnect between the language that we use and the way it's understood. And that financial, they're not. I almost think that we should all do cost benefit analysis for everything so that the board can understand that managing risk is financially astute. And if you, yeah, exactly what Louise is saying, if they don't manage risk, they may end up losing their business, or they may end up having to pay out an awful lot of money that if they just been a bit more Mystic Meg, they would be able to foresee that would happen, if you see what I mean. Channel your inner Mystic Meg, Christian.
Absolutely,
Do
yeah.
you know that's sorry, Christian, I was going to just come in and say, it's so true, because the amount of times I've been in major organizations and looked at the safety procedures and training records, they're amazing. The training looks absolutely fantastic on paper. The safe systems of work are great. And they're all giving themselves high fives, high fives. Look at our system. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. Then you go out to the coal face and you ask the guys at the coal face, it's that disconnect I related to in the beginning of my presentation. It's not even touched the first base. And that's where some of the big problems lie.
Yeah, and Dan just put it in there, like the safety professionals, they're so overwhelmed these days. And Louise has just answered Dan, but Dan's right, everybody's so overwhelmed with all the kind of different things that they need to achieve, but they forget to ask the basic question, is it safe? Like, is the company safe? Is the risk being managed in the way that we would expect it to be managed? Do people understand the concept of so far as reasonably practicable? In reality, you get to choose as an organization how much risk you're willing to take. You actually fundamentally do that, but you need to be clear to the people that work for you. And if Bob, who works in the stores, doesn't understand that, what hope have we got of getting those people engaged? So it filters, it proliferates throughout the whole organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I often talk about is, and apologies if you've heard me say this before, but I've done lots of polls on LinkedIn, for example, saying, how often when you take a new safety role do you see things you can improve? Is it always, often, sometimes, or never? And whenever I do that poll, I do it every so often. Uh, it's pretty much always 85% are saying always or often. So most of the time, the vast majority of the time, we as safety professionals are saying, when I start a new role, I can find things to improve. And the sort of mirror I like to try and shine on that is, well, if that is the case, you know, Carla's taking Louise's job, she can find things to improve. Louise is taking Davy's job, she can find things to improve. Davy's taking, if we can always find things to improve when other people have done the work before us, we can probably find a lot of things to improve if we're just willing to look in the mirror and willing to take that step back and be a bit self-critical and say, are we doing this right? As you said, Carla, is this actually safe?
Yeah, it's a fundamental question. And sometimes we as safety professionals can make it too academic and we can overcomplicate the basic question. But the thing is, are we actually fundamentally managing the level of risk?
Hmm.
And I think that sometimes gets lost in the myriad of tick boxes. And as Davey said, that all of those kind of different things, we've got like gold-plated policies and procedures. Look, woohoo, high five. But it is about continuous improvement and it is about being self-critical as both professionals, but within the organization. Oh, Dan's giving us some love there. Love back to you, Dan. Love back to you.
I think Maurice has got a question,
Go on,
He uh,
Reese.
he he wants to. I asked him, and he wants to do it at the end, so that's fine.
Oh,
So
okay.
I'm gonna call him up at the end. Don't worry. I'm doing my best webinar hosting impersonation as I possibly can.
Can I just respond to Dan's
Yeah.
message as well? Is that Dan, I see this all the time. There is too much for us to do if we're dealing with reactive stuff. And we're never gonna, there isn't an organization on the planet that will have a safety team that's big enough, particularly in a high hazard environment, if the overall maturity of the organization is low. So we have to learn about change management. We have to learn about a much more strategic approach, and we have to prioritize. We cannot deal with everything at the same time because the organization can't take it. So we've got to
Yeah.
look for ways to slow down, to speed up.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely, Louise. I totally agree with that. And that, organizations like you says, there's not one out there that's got all their ducks in a row, and I think it's so important to sort of prioritize, whether that's with a rag status or, low, medium or high, however you do it, it's got to be prioritized, and there's so much we spoke about, or you guys have spoke about on this forum, manual handling, cost to sear, Lola has Legionellas, audits, leadership, risk assessments, procedures, safe systems, where all these things, and it's all being bolted on to maybe a team of individuals, a small team, or one person, and then we've got to think about the environmental aspect and sustainability. So yeah, well, me personally, I don't know what everybody else is thinking, but you do sort of feel overwhelmed and absolutely swamped with a number of things we've got to do, and then we've got ISO audits coming in. But don't get me wrong, those ISO audits are a vehicle to get leverage for change as well. And I've actually used that to push things across the table and say, X, Y, and Z, and get our point across as a team. So no, I totally agree with everything that's been said on this webinar, really. And Carla has actually, she spoke so much sense in the last 5, 10, 15 minutes. And it's just absolutely brilliant and refreshing to hear actually people coming out of being honest and upfront and having these discussions as well. So thank you very much to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just to as safety leaders, and I'm finding a newfound purpose these days because I've got space. It's we have to drive a change that takes our organizations from reactive to proactive. So I asked questions earlier on about maturity frameworks, and do go back and look at the Bradley curve and think about how you can apply that in your organization, because it's people think they're the experts in safety because they can see this myriad of things that are wrong. But actually, to go back to my presentation, when we start raising those concerns in that way with leadership, they will shut down and we won't get the impact that we need within the organization. So what I'm suggesting with Choice Chain is that this is about a series of decisions that are made when we're not in the room. So how can we tweak our language and our communication style so that we're speaking the same language of the boardroom, and support and help leaders?
Yeah, really, really important. Davy's had to go. He's got to catch a flight, so he's headed off. But thank you to him, and I really appreciate his contributions. Something that you said there, Louise, about being seen as the expert because you can diagnose lots of problems. I think that is a really big challenge for us, because I think the understanding from lots of boards is, well, you're the health and safety person, you must know how to solve all these
Yeah.
problems. And the reality is that the job of being the health and safety leader, whatever the job title is a bit more like being a GP, not a surgeon. So it is that diagnostic, and it's that sort of course setting, but actually you can't physically know how to solve every single problem that might exist in a safety sense across the whole business. You can't. It's not possible for someone to do that. I always talk about if you think of knowledge as like a piece of dough and you can sort of shape it, if you've got to have your knowledge of being a mile wide, then you've got to flatten that dough, and it's only ever going to be very, very thin. It's not going to have much depth. Um, so I think a lot of it is explaining that back up, isn't it? And managing up. And the CEO, well, the CEO can't do everything under the sun in the business. They understand that, but you need to sort of explain to them that you're kind of like them and within your bit of the business.
And it's getting that something I've learned is getting the buy-in of relevant stakeholders. And somebody else asked a question, is something that I do within organizations is I create stakeholder groups. Something I started probably 25 years ago is what I call steering groups. And so it's pulling together, looking at how we can create stakeholder groups that will not only give you a perspective and a view, but they will help solve problems, they will innovate, they will then take, help us to turn our strategy into deliverables that shift the conversation forward. The other, just to raise another point, is that something else I've been doing, it's like, don't give me time again, because I might just change the world. Is that I've been learning about AI, and the power that we have now in AI is phenomenal. And I think I've heard people speak in the past about us being behind the curve when it comes to tech. Well, actually, we've got an opportunity now, because let's reinvent ourselves and start using AI. So all of this data that we capture, we're able to actually understand it much more clearly and focus on the data that we need, just not move into this big data landscape. Whilst we're still going to need our human element, because we live in the world of people, so that's not going to take anything away from us. It's just going to enhance what we do. I think it's hugely powerful tool for good in our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of that. I'm conscious of time. I want to be kind of respectful that we've taken a little bit longer from people than we had said, and I do want to give a bit of time for questions. So I'll ask each of you just one final question, then we'll open it up to any Q&A from the audience. So if someone's joined us today, what's one practical action that they could take in the next 30 days that would really make a difference to achieve, 2026 being their safest year yet?
So for me, I would say go and talk to people. It seems like a really basic thing that when we first start in safety, everybody always says to us, oh, we need to learn how to communicate. Internally review the way you communicate with people and go out there and talk to people at all levels. So knowing how to do that is incredibly important. And Louise, whilst you've been talking, people have been putting things in the chat, but go out there and discuss with people. Try and find out, ask the question, does everybody in the organization understand what risk is? So go and ask people the question, do you understand what risk is? And see their responses, because we see this every single day. You ask the question and you see a blank face. And risk is so fundamental and it's so interrelated within an organization. It's not just about safety. It's not just about health. It's about the organization. And if we all want to keep our jobs and be more productive in the UK and all of these kind of things, we need to understand how it fits with an organization as part of it. It's the heart of running an organization, is being able to manage risk effectively. That's my point, I would say. Go and ask people.
Fantastic. Louise?
I'd say in terms of what we can do as individual professionals, I would, particularly if you're running on reaction, is go back to the Bradley curve and think about what your top 3 priorities are and really concentrate on that, and then use some of the techniques that we've been describing, which are behavioral, which are strategic, to advocate for a purpose in the organization that puts well-being at the heart of that organization for long-term sustainability and true sustainability. So that's an advocate, be an advocate for that, but prioritize and don't try to do everything. What are your top 3 things that can make the biggest impact in your organization?
Yeah, love that. Stephen in the chat here said we've got to stop people saying they're very busy and don't have the time. We can always find the time. I think that's very true, isn't it? People will always find the time for things that they prioritize. So it's not a question of time. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but the billionaires in the world have the same amount of time as the rest of us. And the high performing athletes have the same amount of time as the rest of us, don't they? So it's all about what we actually prioritize. And that's one thing I'm worried about with AI and stuff, is how people's attention spans are waning and stuff. But we won't get into that. We won't get into that for now. Let's take any final questions. Maurice, you had your hand up for a while, so do you want to give us a question or a comment or whatever you wanted to say?
Yeah, question for both Carla and Louise. What are the biggest challenge you faced in your safety initiatives, and how did you address that challenge?
Oh, good question.
I think Louise and I are probably going to say something quite similar. I have a funny feeling. I think it's convincing. I think it's to do with convincing that the senior leadership team that they own risk. One of the things that I think has really been my biggest challenge when I go in and I deliver to kind of large boards, say, for example, in healthcare or in the NHS, for example, is that they own risk and risk is not emotional. So convincing them that the way that they feel about risk is not actually the same as tangible risk. And also getting them to understand that they own it. So a lot of the time they go, well, I've appointed a health and safety person. That's their problem. That's why I've employed them and all the rest of it. And they almost outsource it mentally. But I think convincing them, it takes a lot of work because people run organizations and they think that if they appoint that person, and that person, that that's okay. And they seriously lack the understanding often that that risk firmly sits with them. So that's my view. I think Louise probably might say something quite similar, actually.
I mean, it is helping and supporting leaders to understand, I have an ability to go in and make change within an organization, but that doesn't take away anything that the leadership needs to do. And that gap is absolutely tangible. And where an organization, particularly where an organization is at very low maturity, and nothing has really happened, they believe that actually, because we've been operating in this way for however many years, we're going to continue to be sustainable. But the world is changing very, very rapidly.
So,
And
Louise, yeah, sorry, I'm just thinking about what you were saying. So, yesterday we heard a case from one of the lawyers. We were at a transport conference with a team of lawyers, and they told us about a case where a company had been operating for many years, and they were a transport company, no problems, no problems. They had a safety professional, they had competent advice, they appeared to have everything just so. The HSC came in on an inspection, they found 9 different things that were wrong. At the end of the whole process, they prosecuted them for 4 offences, and yet they had nothing that had ever happened. They'd never had an incident. And our view is that we only get prosecuted if something happens, but it's not the case. And I think they ended up getting a £25,000 fine just for not having a suitable and sufficient risk assessment in a particular area. And that was after the lawyers negotiated all of the mitigating factors. And we believe that we're fine. We go, well, we've got some safety professional, we've got this, we've got that. And there's that belief that just because nobody's approached us so far that it's all good and that we haven't had an accident, it's all good. It's all good. But they don't know, do they?
I think it's this piece of, and I mentioned, the Vale Dam disaster, which I've been looking at on my governance course recently. And it's, in that particular case, a technical expert said this dam is fine. And actually what happened was the leadership, that gave them it was a confirmation bias. And so it just goes to show that safety is seen as compliance. If I have a piece of paper or somebody's told me it's safe, I've discharged my responsibilities. And so it's actually bringing it back to be something that's tangible, that's difficult. And in my presentation, I talked about the knock-on effects that our transformational programs have. And that's triggering when you talk to leaders about that, and they freeze. And so that's probably my biggest challenge.
Definitely, yeah. Can resonate with that one. Well, look, thank you so much. Alan, you've got your hand up. Go on.
Hand up.
Go on, Alan.
Alan Plum, the gorgeous, lovely Alan Plum.
It was literally just to say thank you. And Christian, thanks for flagging it up. And it's been a few years since I've been alongside Louise, so it was great to see you again.
I'm back, Alan.
Yeah. But the presentations, I did put something in the chat after Davy's session that it took me back to the 80s when my background is in agriculture and farm safety, ex-HSE inspector and so on. And we used this giant of a man called Jeff Capes, if ever you remember him. He's the world's strongest man and all that. And I've also put a comment subsequently about know your audience. And what we did with Jeff Capes was really what Davy was intimating. We had Jeff in an arena in front of lots of farmers at county shows with a tiny guy who came up to about his waist, to be honest, Ray Pettit. And Jeff did all the talking, but he got Ray to do all the handling. And it was all about how you approach it and plan it and avoid it and everything. So it is about knowing your audience. That's the key. And that chimes with all you're talking about with leadership. I'm also aware of research which identifies in my own field different attitudes towards risk. And the research went on to analyze how you need to speak to individuals to convey your message effectively. Some do need telling, and then the big stick, but there's other various approaches. And so there's lots of good stuff around there looking at behavioral studies and so on. But no, great start. And Christian, we can talk in the margins about what you might do about slips in agriculture, but I do fear it's a forlorn hope. The only other comment I'd make is, Louise, I thought you might like my picture. I've got a halo around my head. That was a wonderful cloud formation I saw out of my front window one day, and I rushed out and took a photograph. So there you go.
You're looking great, and it's great to have your energy on the call, Alan.
I'm just trying to be retired, but it doesn't work when there's always interesting things.
Don't bother. There's just too much work for you to be doing.
Anyway, you must all go, but thank you. It's been a good morning.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, and thank you to everybody that's joined us today. Obviously, special thanks to Davy, to Louise, and Carla as well. I hope everybody has got some good practical insights from this. I hope it's made you think a bit differently, and I hope it's inspired you to try to, as we suggested at the start, make 2026 your safest year yet. We will put out the full recording of this on YouTube, and we'll share that to the attendees, and we'll send you your digital goodie bag as well. Keep the conversation going, and if you want us to do more stuff like this, let us know, because I'm sure we'd all be happy to arrange another session at some point soon as well. So yeah, thank you so much, everybody.
This is the first time I've talked about the choice chain, so I'm hoping that, we'll create some noise from this and just, let's start quoting the choice chain.
Good stuff. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.